Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Semantic Kernel public community office hours. As always, I have to say public because it's a public forum. So welcome everyone to share and talk. Just know that you're doing so in a public setting. So uh, great to be back. Last week I was in San Francisco giving a talk actually. So if you all were at the AI conference over there, great to have met you. I know that there was this like long line for office hours immediately after the talk, which I didn't know about until when I had to give it. So if you didn't get to say hi, sorry about that. But um, you know, why we have Discord, that's why we have forums such as this. So yeah, it was a good conference overall. Interestingly, I'll just share some observations. I think a lot of people uh, in attendance. It was more of a technical audience, but also like a lot of just business owners, a lot of people who are just. It really resonated, this idea of like, hey, we're just getting started building enterprise AI applications, and there is this like gap between showing off a cool demo versus being able to go to production. So, part of my talk, I talked or showcased a lot of the co-pilots that Microsoft is building. I guess fortunate timing that like the week before Microsoft made these big announcements around, co-pilot everywhere, right? From Office, Excel, even the latest Windows Surface machines. So all that to say is that it was quite well received. People really wanted to understand how these co-pilots are built. And in my talk, which will actually be published later, probably in like a month's time from what I hear, I got to dive into planning and just planner overall, which was a good piece of content to focus on because apparently everyone else at the conference was talking about RAG, the retrieval augmented generation pattern, and kind of working with vector databases. A ton of vector database companies were over there. So all that's to say is that focusing on planning and planner and kind of those like agentic style behaviors was a good thing. I'll also call out that just even this week there was, I guess yesterday, the NLP summit that I also kind of did a pre-recorded talk for. So it was the exact same topic. So I just got to do it again. But yeah, if you attended that or if you know people who are probably more towards the data scientist persona, right? A lot of great talks, a lot of great speakers there. So hopefully, right, they got to be introduced to semantic kernel if they haven't already. One more thing to call out is I'll actually be next week back in San Francisco for the AI Engineer Summit. So again, if anyone is there in attendance, apparently you can get a free ticket to watch it virtually. But I'll also be speaking at that place as well. So happy to meet you all, and yeah, engage with the community. All right, so we have some new announcements. Actually, we have in the last couple of weeks we've had many things come out. So several blogs have been published around just more of these quality of life developer focus features, and even things that really allow you to do a lot more things. So this idea of like being able to have pre and post hooks, otherwise known as like callbacks, where you can kind of either intercept the response from the large language model and do stuff with it before just going to the next request. Like I think these sort of things give you, the developer, more tools to really have more control over the application that you want to build. We also have some latest stuff around error handling. So definitely check that out. And also, this literally just came in today. So Matthew wrote this new blog post around the official move from skills to plugins. So I think for anyone who's been following along journey. We start off with skills, probably still like that in the repo today, but that very much is transitioning towards the word plugins. And that is a Microsoft-wide kind of term that is going to be used. So yeah, very soon, actually you see this in this post, right? Preparing for this V 1.0 release by the end of the calendar year. So all that is to the shift to plugins is a big portion of making that happen. Make sure you pull the latest and download the latest packages across all the languages. Okay, so the other thing to call out is, OpenAI function calling. It's posted this on Discord, but it's out now for those who don't know. So if you want to hear some of the rationalizations, the design decisions around how the team decided to implement this feature, you can check this out. And yeah, definitely give us feedback because we know it's been much requested for a while, and yeah, it is there. It's there for you to use, and hopefully it should make your planners and your functions more reliable, especially if you're using them to create structured output. So, and again, another video just talking about this push towards an event-driven architecture with these pre-post hooks and callbacks. I forgot to add the slide around the latest packages, but you just do this. Right? If I go to GitHub, go to our releases. I remember seeing this last week, is that if you're a Java user, definitely grab the latest Java 0.2.9. This also should be moving towards main in the near future, hopefully not too long, but for those who want to get access to it, there is still the experimental Java branch on GitHub, or you could get the direct libraries from Maven or the package manager. Latest Python as well, and the latest .NET. I guess it's 2 weeks ago, so it's not truly latest. We will be updating these libraries soon. Probably, I remember seeing a message maybe beginning of next week, if not this week. So yeah, you guys can see what's in there. Some good stuff. Okay, so without further ado, before we dive into questions, which we don't have a ton of today, so definitely invite you all to just raise your hand, ask what you'd like to see. But before we do that, we actually have Devis here. He's back from vacation, so he can actually give a deeper dive into semantic memory, which for those, again, who've been following, is a new repo, relatively new repo, that aims to kind of provide a higher level of abstraction around just memory concepts overall, so that if you're building semantic kernel applications, right, if you don't want to dig into this nitty-gritty around memory stores and whatnot, you could use something like semantic memory to help you. So I'll pass it off to Devis, and he will walk through semantic memory.
Hi everyone, thank you, Alex. I share my screen right away so that we can look at documentation and code and demos. The first thing I want to say is there is a fundamental difference between, there are many types of memories, and this is a good, simple but good way to talk about memory. So if you look at the kernel today, we have these object in the kernel that we call memory, and we usually call it semantic memory, which is a way to store information and then search for, you can use it to search for similar information. Once after storing it, you can retrieve by similarity. And you can store whatever you want, but it's usually information, generic information. It could be a document, a chunk of a document and things like that. We have a longer term vision about building a very functional memory that can emulate more than that. And like in particular, you can store facts. What you can see here, these episodic memories that those episodes or facts can be extracted from whatever content you provide. Let's say you let's say you ingest a document with a list of things you have done over the summer. You can extract from the document some episodes. We want to make that possible. And then there is a thing called implicit memory. This is modeled around the human brain. There are things that you know explicitly and things that you know implicitly. You learn over time. And you can recognize these word skills, which is something that we have been using in the kernel. We're renaming it to plugins. But in our brain, we have this part where we memorize skills. We learn how to do things. Currently, skills are kind of, we have native skills and semantic skills, and they are kind of defined either with code or prompts. I believe that over time, we will be able to teach AI those skills through conversations or observing information that we provide directly or indirectly. So longer term, with future models, I believe out of memory we will also get these skills. But today we're still in the explicit space, and we want to provide a solution that allows to ingest a lot of the information and answer questions. So if you look at the memory scale that we have in the kernel, it doesn't have an ask method. It has a recall method, which given a string retrieves the similar content from the memory. In the new project, in this new repo, we have this new method called ask that given a question returns an answer. The answer is not in the storage itself, is generated on the fly. This is where we start talking about RAG. And given several chunks of text extracted from documents or images or voice, given those chunks, you can generate an answer. So this is the very high level description of the long-term vision of our memory. And talking about the memory object that we have in this new repo, if somebody is familiar with its interface, which we call a high semantic memory client, it has a few methods to import data like documents or text or a web page. You can say load this web page into memory. There is these two methods, search and ask, which used to have a filter. You could say, when I'm searching my memory or when I'm asking a question, I want to, yeah, when we are, I guess everybody's having it. Okay, so we can ground the generation of an answer on the entire set of your information or on specific data sets. And you can provide a filter. Now we have added the ability to provide more filters. So to explain this in a different way, in the past, you could provide one filter with many tags, and it would translate into an AND expression like tag one and tag two and tag three. Now we can provide a list so we can combine and or logic, and I get into those details. So we can provide more complex filtering at the moment when we're searching for text or when we're asking for an answer. So we have this document in the repo. We switch to my browser here, which explains what filters are and why we introduce them. So the main reason for filters is security. In particular, many customers are asking, how do I protect my data or user information from another user? And the quick way is to physically separate records. For example, if you're using Azure Cognitive Search or Pinecone, you can create multiple indexes or collections. They have different names, and you cannot query all of them. When you at the time of querying, you have to specify, I'm sending this query to index one or index two, index three, so you can map one index to a user. However, if you look at these, doesn't really scale well, depending on the engine that you select. For example, with Azure Cognitive Search, the number of indexes has an impact on the cost, and there is a limit of a few thousands at this time. It's going to change in the future and get better, so you can have an infinite number of indexes. But as of today, you can create a few thousand indexes. After that, you have to do another deployment, and it becomes hard to map the user to the index. It's expensive. If you look at Pinecone, you get one index for free, then you start paying for the extra indexes, and creating an index can take several seconds. It used to take minutes. Other engines like Quadrant, indexes are cheap. Like you can create as many indexes as you want. So this idea of separating data by indexes can work, but it doesn't scale too much. And you might have a need for splitting data, not just by user, but by other dimensions, like by department, by type, or I don't know, by language, and so forth. So we have added this concept of tags. And when you write data, now you can choose the index, or you can leave the index parameter empty, and you can pass some tags. And you can use tags to say whatever you like. You can say the user is 5, the user is 15, the email address is this, the email address is another one. You can use GUIDs, or you can add multiple values for the same tag. So for example, you can say this memory record belong to 2 users or 5 users, and so forth. So this is very flexible and kind of free. In many engines, you can add this extra payload where you write a record, like a vector. You can attach extra information. So that's how we store tags. So to give you an example, here we're importing a document, and then we're asking a question, and the question will be generated, the answer will be generated from the content of this file. We have the ability to say, okay, I want to store this file in this index. It's fine, it's easy. Or you can use tags. You can say, I want to import this document. I want to append a tag like user 333. And then I can filter my question on those tags. I can say, I can ask this question. It will be applied to the entire index, ignoring tags. Or you can say, I want to ground the answer to documents which have this tag. So at this point, you can see how you can split data by user. Like you might get a different answer if these two users have ingested different documents. And you can combine indexes and tags, of course. So far, so good. This is kind of straightforward. Just an example here, though. In this case, you will get no answer. So by design, if you put data in one index, and then you query without specifying the index, it will go to an index called default. In this case, you get no answer for the same reason, because the index is different, even if the tag matches. But in this case, you will get an answer because you're selecting the right index and the right user. And this as well will give you an answer because you're querying the entire index. Here I'm showing you how you can apply multiple values for the same tag. This is a way, for example, to say these memories are accessible to multiple users. And you can query with a single user. You see, you get an answer. And this is more examples where you can say, I can use tags to specify the type. For example, I might have a bunch of documents about planning, a bunch of documents about blogs, other documents about chats. You can ask filtering by those tags. So from a security perspective, we recommend to always have a user tag. The name of the tag doesn't matter as long as you have a tag dedicated to the user identity. So always write data with a user tag, and always query your data with a user tag. This new memory service does not do authentication for you. So currently it is designed to run as a private component that you deploy in your private network, and you access that from your backend. Like you can think about this as a database that you should not expose to the public. You access the database from your application. So when you talk to your database, you have to filter, you have to write your own SQL, you write your own filters. And of course, use the proper authentication mechanism. We suggest Azure Active Directory, but there are many good ones. Usually work with JWT tokens, as long as they are signed is good enough. You can extract the user ID from the token, and you can use that user ID as a filter. So this has been possible in the new memory component for a couple of months. Since yesterday, we actually, a couple of days ago, we have added now the ability to do more complex filtering. So you can say tailor, like the memory belongs to user one or user two, instead of user one and user two. And you can go more and more complex queries like reply to my question, looking at the news that belong to Taylor and the blogs that belong to Andrea. So you can all do all of these as long as you understand this new syntax. So before we were using the filter parameter, we have this new filters parameter, which is a list of filters. Each filter, so this is a list. Each entry is basically a list of conditions which are concatenated with the AND logic. And then each item is concatenated with the other using the OR logic. So in this case, you have answer to my question, looking at memory that belongs to Taylor and looking at memories that belong to Andrea. So using the OR logic. So the memory can belong to one or the other. It doesn't need to belong to both. Then, of course, there is some confusion often depending on the language that you speak, what and translates from natural language to code. For example, if I say reply using memories belonging to Taylor and Andrea, it can be confusing. Like, do you mean that it belongs to both, or it can belong to one of the two? So you have to think about your application, what that really means. So the user requirement might be it needs to belong to both, or it needs to belong to one of the two. So you have to choose whether to use a name or a node. Like this is another example. Reply to my question using news belonging to Taylor and blogs belonging to Andrea. So here we have a type, we have an end. So usually it would translate to something like this. So the filter on my memory by user, it needs to belong to Taylor and Andrea, to both of them. It needs to be both a news and a blog. But you could also translate that sentence into something different like this, like filter my memories, select Taylor's memories, only the news, and then select also Andrea memories, but in this case the blogs, and combine both of them. So here's where the OR comes in. And you can see the difference. Here there is this list includes only one filter. This list includes two filters. And that's where the OR comes in. So here there are more examples in the document, but I hope it makes sense how you can combine N and OR. The challenge here is that every engine, so we currently support Azure Cognitive Search, Quadrant, and a custom VectorDB that is stored on disk, very just for development purpose. Each of them has a different way, different syntax. So in Azure Cognitive Search, you use OData. So we translate these into an OData expression that we pass to Azure Cognitive Search. With Quadrant, we use the must and should conditions, and they can be nested. So we had to spend some time to make sure that everything works. And just to be 100% sure, we started adding to the repo functional test. So if you go and look on the test, you will see here we have 3 test cases, test suite. You can see that we're creating a bunch of records from a file, and then we ask what we expect, like not found or found, what were not found and found are basically 2 strings. So I would suggest for people interested in this topic, read the document, give us some feedback. Hopefully it's clear enough. Look at the test. There should be sufficient information here to understand how you can play with filters. And let us know if you need more advanced ways of querying your memories. Of course, the more complexity, the more we start getting into scenarios where a specific kind of query works only with a specific engine. Let's say you want to filter with a NOT or a XOR or things like that. We might say, oh, this works only with Quadrant. It doesn't work in another one, or so forth. We might have to implement the same logic with code, so it starts performing differently. But that's pretty much it. Wondering if there's any questions or feedback.
Yeah, we have a few in the chat. So Tirthana asks about or points out about the loading of web pages. I don't know
Yeah.
what the question is there, but do you want to maybe talk about that? That is how you're doing that? What you're doing there?
Yeah,
Sure.
let me keep
Oh.
that last for a second. I see there's a question from Edward. So negative filters are not currently implemented. They are possible, I think, both with Quadrant and Azure Cognitive Search. We didn't have any ask yet. Nobody has been asking for negative filters, but it is definitely something that we could add, and it's definitely easy to implement. Then I see a question about skills. So web pages. So the way it works, we have, I think we use HTML. So when we look at the import web page, how it is implemented, for example, here, we read the web page, making a simple HTTP request, and then we pass it to the pipeline as an HTML document. I think in that case, we use a standard HTML agility or agility pack, something like that. I don't remember the exact name of the NuGet to extract the text from the page. Nothing super fancy here. We don't recognize content from ads. We extract all the text from the page. And then once the text is extracted, we follow the same process that we follow for documents and PDFs. We chunk the text, we calculate the embeddings, and we store the embeddings in the vector.db. So I think that basically works for many scenarios, like if you're importing web pages where there is a lot of content. If you have web pages where you start having tables and a lot of images, it might not perform as well. And I think we will do more work to understand those images. Like with GPT-4V, you have seen now you can just ask the model to describe the images. You can use that extra information to extract content. And my wish is that in the future, we can recognize the main content and exclude everything else. Though, to be honest, if you try with GPT-4, you do a select all from a page where there is ads, GPT-4 is good enough to understand what is the content, what is the ads. It can kind of answer questions about the main content, ignoring the noise in the page.
Sorry, could you repeat how you extract the data from the page? Do you web scrape or?
We do web scripts. Yeah.
Okay.
We're not using OCR, we're using HTML agility. So like, if I'm still sharing my screen here, there is a handler here. Where is it? Pipeline. No. Handlers is text extraction. So here you can see if it is a web page.
Mm-hmm.
We use the web scripter, which is this class, and it is using, so we fetch the page. If everything goes well, if it is HTML, we read it using this HTML document.
I see.
Yeah, it's very, very simple. And, we welcome any improvement.
And how do you chunk it? That's one of my other questions. I know there's a quick function in LangChain, but not sure about semantic
Yeah.
kernel.
So in semantic kernel, so we have this concept of pipeline. So whenever we ingest document, it goes through a list of steps.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the steps is chunking. So the first step is extracting the text. And let me show you. So these are the steps that we usually do: extract, partition, generate embeddings, save embeddings, and we optionally summarize too. So the partition is where we do the chunking, and we have a chunking handler. This one, partitioning handler. Here we split the text. So this handler will receive an input a text, long text. We use tokenizer to split the text in tokens. And we have these currently hard-coded values. So we split the long text in paragraphs where every paragraph is at max 1,000 tokens. And then when we move to the next paragraph, we keep 300 tokens of overlap. So we carry the same tokens into the next paragraph. We've been playing with these values. Depending on your scenarios, they might work or not. Currently, this seems to work well. There is an ask, though, to be able to customize this. They're currently hard-coded. So that's one feature that we try to implement this month. Whenever you upload data, you want to say, my paragraph should be smaller or bigger. I don't want to overlap and things like that. So that's one thing that we can do very easily. There is another approach we want to try is asking AI to chunk the document. For example, if you're uploading a chat log, the best way to chunk the chat log is by messages. However, you might have multiple conversations which overlap. You would like to extract messages that belong to different conversations. And it's pretty much impossible to write an algorithm for that. But you can ask AI to say, given this chat log, please extract separate conversations into individual chunks, and then you can index those. And that's work that we will do in the future.
Got it. Thank you.
Alex, any other questions?
Yeah, we have some more. I guess, did we talk about Becky's question about skill plugins? Can you have semantic memory tasks and semantic skill plugins in the same kernel? And does that have an impact on the user security?
So could you say again? Is it Linkay or somewhere else? No, I don't see. Oh, semantic memory from Becky. Can you have
Yes.
semantic memory tasks and semantic skill plugins in the same kernel? I assume that we're talking about using multiple memories. Yes, it is totally possible. There is no impact on the security, but you still have to call that in your application. As I mentioned earlier, when you write and you read, you should make, if you're using the memory component in the kernel today, the assumption is that you would use one index per user. There is no other way to do that. You have to write some code, otherwise to use the payload to filter that manually. If you use the new memory here, instead, you can pass these tags to, you can put everything in the same index. So they are slightly different. It might be easier with the new memory. You can totally use both. You can instantiate multiple plugins in the kernel, and you can give to each plugin a name. You say memory 1, memory 2, memory 3. And when you query the memory, you can select which plugin to run. So yeah, it works. Indeed, we were talking about this in the morning. Currently, the fact that the memory is inside of the kernel gives the impression that you can have only one, but you can totally have instantiate multiple memory plugins pointing to different data sources.
So if the user enters some information into their query that might be private or sensitive, does that get stored somewhere we wouldn't want it to be stored?
It depends on the code that you use. So the kernel doesn't have a concept of identity. So it's up to you to write that code, that glue code, to say, write these in a way so that I can recognize to which user it belongs to. So if you write into this new solution, you can say, so whenever you write something, find this interface again.
So mostly my team members were just wondering if we're using like the ChatGPT service with our kernel, if everything the user enters and our plugin prompts are going to be like stored, when we want to keep it internal. That's
You
kind of,
mean like if the model itself is saving that information?
yeah.
No, there is no. This model, the GPT, any language model does not store information. They're really stateless, or you can
Okay.
say static. From a security perspective, that's the only solution, because otherwise people would try to change the models to affect other users. But also
Yeah.
from compliance perspective, we cannot really collect user data in any company, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, OpenAI. They provide these services with some compliance. Usually, this information is public, and Azure for sure we do not collect information. OpenAI, I think they don't, but it might depend on the product that you use. Like if you use the chat itself, they might do some statistical analysis. I don't know. I don't work for OpenAI, so I can't talk to it. But when the model itself, the technology that is behind these products, it doesn't learn. It doesn't memorize anything. It totally, after the query that you send, the data is gone. We
Oh,
can't even
cool.
afford to keep it because there's so much information that it would be too expensive to keep it.
Well, thank you.
Okay, we have some more questions that came in. Moran asks, are these APIs available now?
Yep. So there is a new NuGet, two of them. So you can use the new memory in two modalities with deploying the service. So at that point you have a web service you can talk to, and there is a web client. There's a web client for .NET, but it's pretty simple to write a web client. There is even one for Bash to write one if you use something like Java or Python. Or you can use the memory in serviceless or serverless mode, which is very similar to the kernel, where it does everything in the same context of your application. They have the same API, and there are two packages: is microsoft.semanticmemory.core and microsoft.semanticmemory.client. And there is also an example in the repo about how to use the NuGet. There is a notebook which shows the same. So it should be pretty simple. Otherwise, just point ask on this code or on the GitHub. We will provide more examples.
Okay, so John asks about, does loading of web pages support SharePoint web part scraping, and does it deal with authentication?
I don't see the question.
It's right below Moran's question. John.
Web part scraping. I don't know, to be honest. We want to support SharePoint and OneDrive. Absolutely. I think it's a great scenario where you say, as a company, I store all my data in SharePoint, and I want the memory service to keep indexing everything so I don't have to think about it. And you might want to do the same for your personal OneDrive so that you can ask questions about your data. I haven't tried with SharePoint yet. The way I was thinking about it is like I need to get past the authentication, then I can fetch any document. And in theory, the other problem is that currently the memory duplicates all the content because we need those chunks. Some customers told us we do not want or we can't duplicate that content, so we need to think about it. And so currently, I would say it doesn't support it. We plan to support it, and we will talk about it here the next time as soon as it is ready.
Yeah, so if I could just add an extension to that question, that we've got a customer that's looking to do that, and also looking at the graph API, but they're also very keen to maintain fidelity of security at the document level. So what I'm thinking is if we could figure that out and apply that as a tag on the way in, then that would help.
Absolutely, totally agree. We're on the same page. Last year we were using Graph to so we had this internal prototype last year where we were using Micrograph to pull all the information from Teams, Outlook, the calendar, and a bit of SharePoint. It was working fine, but being a prototype, we were totally ignoring security. We just wanted to prove that you could do it. And yeah, as you point out, security is a big challenge because there is a user expectation here. The moment I change the permissions in Active Directory or in SharePoint, I would expect that change to be reflected into the memory. So we need to think about how we're going to update the tags. So if a user leaves the company or if I make a public document private, I need to know exact how soon the memory will reflect that change. In particular, it should happen. I can't assume that I can't think about the memory doesn't know about security and now I have a problem. So it's a complex topic, but security is one of our main requirements. Many customers keep asking, like this is nice, AI is great. We want to use AI to talk to our dogs, but it needs to be aware of the security layer. So we have a lot of design to do in the space.
All right, we have a few more. So Ling Kai asks the question. Actually, Ling Kai, if you're here, do you want to come off me and just describe your question?
So yeah, this is probably a very silly question. So I'm just using this code, this memory search function, and the connector is the Azure Cognitive Service. And so the index, the vector index, was created by somebody, and so I just don't know what it is about. But I could go in and look at the structure of it. But just before I do anything, I'm just wondering, using the syntax search async with the collection name and a straight question, which is just a straight text question, I'm getting this error saying bad response or bad query. So I'm wondering, do I need to be aware of the index structure? Because when you create the index, you are going to specify the fields. Some can be just single fields, some you can have whatever fields you want. But looks like in this code, I'm not specifying any structure, and maybe that's related to it.
Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people have been using Azure Cognitive Search before we started using it in the kernel. So you might have your own index created a year ago, 2 years ago, and
Right.
you cannot change it or you don't want to. The kernel currently, and both the new and the old solutions are the same. They are hard coded to a specific schema. So if your schema doesn't match, it will throw an exception. We've told some customers to edit the code, adjusting the field names. It's not that easy, depending on how familiar we are with the Azure Search and the code base. And the other part is the schema is kind of complicated. The old one, the new one is a little bit easier, but the tags make it a little bit complicated again. So what we want to do is we cannot really automatically detect your schema, but we want to give away. We are going to extend the API so that you can say, this is my schema. This is where the text is. This is where the vector is. This is where the tag should be stored. It doesn't exist today, so we're managing this case by case, helping people to say this is how you can change the code. We will provide that solution. This is one of the top priorities in our backlog to say, we call it bring your own schema. Like, okay, I have an existing storage. I cannot rebuild it. It would take, even if it takes an hour, I cannot afford to have a 1 hour downtime. I want the memory to adapt to my schema. So we will provide that pretty soon. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So before, just quickly, if it is possible, say before the fix comes, is there any way for me to use the existing code to work around it, or I just simply have to create a new index?
It depends on if you're working in production. I would suggest to change the code so you don't touch
it. It's experimental. Well, for now,
if it
I'm
is
just
experimental, yeah, I would suggest to create a new index in that case. It's probably easier. Or you let the code to create it for you. The code typically creates the index if you give it a new name.
Okay. So let the code create the index. So then the code internally, well, it's just using the default format.
That's right. Yeah.
It's, got it. Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, Edward asked question. So okay, it's the I'm trying to read these courses. I think Edward's making a point about using tags to limit the search space because it's important when you're dealing with a very large knowledge base. I guess, is this going to be coming into the core skills for the kernel? Edward, if you want to elaborate some more. Or...
No, that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we consider the memory one of the core skills, like the planner, the web search. So yes, although you might have heard that we're trying to ship kernel v1. So v1 is important because that means we will support it and we won't break the API. And I believe we're still talking about it, but v1 might be using the old memory. And so the new memory might be outside of v1 as a separate component. And in that case, the core skill of v1, the memory in the core skill for v1 might not be the new memory, which will be an additional non-core component that we will tell people how to move, how to migrate from the old to the new one. So it's just a matter of timing. So we could wait and ship v1 next year, so we finish moving to the new memory. But we prefer shipping the v1 as soon as possible because a lot of people want to build a solution on something that we support long term. So I think in a matter of a couple of months, we will have kernel v1 with the current memory in the core scale, which does not support a custom schema. And then we will provide on the side the new memory where you can use your own schema, and we will provide very clear and detailed instructions about how to replace the old memory with a new one without too much pain. So I think that's the fastest way to ship it.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Moran, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I have two questions. I'm pretty new to semantic kernel. I've been using it for the past couple of weeks just to test it out, see if it's a good fit for my company. My questions are related to embedding. The first one is basically each time that I do a memory search, I think I am doing a vector search, like I'm querying, passing the query as a vector and just find the similarity within my memory, which in this case is Postgres with vector DB plugin. Okay, so, and the second one is a more general question. It's about clustering. I see semantic kernel. I see that it's really like one-stop shop for me as a developer to apply certain pipeline and other solution. Do I really need clustering, or can I just pass it along and not deal with it at all? Or is it not something that you're dealing with? It's just a general question.
For vector search, I think, yeah, you're right. The way it currently works, when there is a user question, which is a string, we calculate the embeddings of the string, search for similar content in the storage, and then we decide what to do with that similar content. You can inject that into a prompt to generate an answer, or you can show the results directly to the user. Although there are scenarios where vector search doesn't work well. If you're working with a lot of acronyms or text that doesn't have a specific meaning, like numbers or formulas. In that case, the old text search works better. And the intention here is to combine vector search with text search, what people call hybrid search. So we don't have it yet, but we will provide it, and we will make it optional and configurable so that you can say, I use both, I want to use only this or the other one. We've seen scenarios where vector search doesn't really work. The threshold is too low, and then that can cause some hallucinations. So it's good when you're talking about the meaning of something, but some users sometimes are searching for a specific string, and vector search doesn't work that case. So we need to merge both technologies and try to make it easy, but also possible. Like today, you have to choose one or the other because the kernel doesn't support both. Regarding clustering, I don't know. I don't understand the question. Sorry. We don't have a concept of clustering in the kernel, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, I was just wondering if clustering is something that is part of the process, or it's something that it's not in the scope of semantic kernel and won't be used at all.
So
Like
yeah,
clustering as a horizontal scaling is that kind of clustering.
Yeah, I think so. Something that I can like filter my data to specific topics and find, and because I'm in the customer experience business, so I want to know what my customers are talking about and gather
see.
related points. But I don't know if it's necessary, because it seemed to me like semantic kernel can do those things with skills and other stuff that I can pretty much achieve without using clusters.
yeah, Moran, I think for this, if you're talking about like the data science, like clustering of data in the unsupervised learning way, right? You could actually very much create a, if you've done this in Python or whatever favorite library, you can express that as a native function, if you will, and then import that into the kernel and just say like, hey, I'm going to use this clustering thing. It's going to output one of n number of clusters using a technique like k-means or whatnot, right? And yeah, like you can then reason or do stuff with that. Like that, has it been done yet? I mean, no, I'm just talking out loud, but it should be very possible. And treat the kernel as just the runtime, or at least the execution engine for these different things that you could put into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, clustering might be before the kernel. Like, I think you can take it from many ways. Like, you might want to train your own model, and then you start talking about clustering. When the model is ready, then you start using the model in the kernel. Or you might take a general model like GPT-4 and do a detect on the fly the topic or the type of customer, asking the model what kind of user is this, if you have sufficient context about the user, or what kind of question is this. Sometimes we talk about intent detection. So it really depends on your scenarios, but I would say as a rule of thumb, the kernel runs with a model that has been trained before. We do not train the model on the fly. But going back to the previous question, the model that we use is not learning, it's very static and frozen in time.
Exactly. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Cool. We are running out of time, but I'll just answer these quick questions. So David is asking about, how do these tags and filters that David showed off, how do you translate a natural language query so that it actually uses these filters and tags?
Yeah, we translate like if you mean by from English to code, that is not happening today. We could use the planner to do that, but the memory filter dot by tag and then the and or, we translate that we translate the C# code to the specific engine query syntax. Like if we are using Azure Cognitive Search, we translate the C# code to OData. With Quadrant, we translate to the JSON language that they use for the queries. So the filtering is done by the engine. We do not do filtering in the application layer. We try to delegate everything to the storage layer. If you think we might be using Postgres soon, we will translate that C# to SQL, and we will delegate to Postgres to do the vector filtering or all the register filtering.
Cool. And people just have one quick minute since we didn't get into any of these questions, but they're not super complicated. I think we can answer them very quickly. But basically, so this question around getting structured formats that you can program against, like XML or JSON, right? How do you solve this with semantic kernel? So one is you could have the model try to output this, but it's not always reliable. That's why we have some companion projects, things like type chat, which we can go into in a future time. We can invite the authors of type chat to come and give a presentation. But yeah, I would take a look at type chat in terms of the project and see how it could be used to accomplish this. There's also some other projects out there like guardrails and other ones that you could definitely consider and bring in as a plugin, right, to the semantic kernel. And this one is just about, yeah, using natural language to SQL, where you have more complex queries, complex joins. I mean, we don't have there's not a direct answer here other than we have some resources on our dev blog around members of our team tackled this. There's even stuff from the community that you can find around some additional plugins to try to do NL to SQL. But yeah, Mike, if you want to send over on Discord or GitHub the exact type of complex query you're imagining, that would be helpful for us to see how we could do this.
Hey, Alex, I'd like to chime in here. So this is also one of the problems that we want to solve with the new memory project. We haven't started yet, but if you think about the user has a question, we want to generate the answer. We want to be able to plug in SQL tables. And Chris in our team has done some work, some experimentation. So if you go to the semantic memory repo, under examples, there is a folder called .NET NL to SQL with code that Chris wrote a couple of months ago. And I would suggest taking a look and see if it solves or addresses a little bit of your scenario.
Yep. And as Anthony points out in the chat, you can also use OpenAI function calling for the structured output piece. So yes, that's actually a big reason why we brought it in. And yes, Anthony also created the hackathon winning plugin here. So check this one out, in addition to the one that Devis pointed out inside the semantic memory. Okay, Matthew, I see your hand up.
One quick question about the hackathon plugins. Is there like a blog post or a list online that I can just go like read about who submitted what? I mean, you're highlighting this one. I'd love to see the other ones that were created if they're publicly available.
Yeah. Ping me on Discord. I
will.
I can send you some stuff.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm super excited. Thank you.
All right. With that, thank you everybody for coming, staying a little late, and yeah, we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.